Thank you, Marina. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Quick show of hands. I usually ask this at the beginning. How many people have been to Growth Colony before an event? Oh, right. We're getting more popular. We usually, when I ask that question, there's like one hand that goes up. So thank you very much for coming back. For those of you who are new, Growth Colony is a community of growth marketers here in Melbourne. We've recently are expanding to Sydney and Perth and Brisbane, but it started here in Melbourne, and the whole purpose of it was to bring people, bring growth marketers together, and specifically experts in this space to talk about their experience, what they're going through, and making sure that we keep the knowledge gap as little as possible. So tonight we have Matthew from iflix. Now. There you go. We got fans in the house, sir. So we got Matthew from iflix, and he's the lead engineer and growth hacker at iflix. I'm not going to try and explain what he does because I think he would do a much better job. But what we're going to discuss tonight is going to be how Matthew at iflix approaches growth systematically in order to hit certain targets that they have. From growth perspective, and how that could be implemented in any kind of business that you're in, that systematic approach. So on that note, please help me welcome Matthew. Hey, wave to the fans.
The fun.
Matthew, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, I kind of did a lousy introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a quick intro? And before we start with that, what I forgot, which probably Alex is giving me a little bit of a nudge over there, there is Slido, and this, if you just go on slido.com, you could post in the questions that you have, right? And then you can also see what other questions other people are posting. If you go on slido.com and put iflix as the code, then you can upvote other questions that you want to ask or you think it's relevant. We're going to do a mix of questions, and we'll take a look at those questions. But we also love to get some interaction from the audience. So we're gonna reach out to the audience and get questions as well. But on that note, I do apologize for that interruption.
Yeah, no
but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and you know, how did you get here and maybe then about iflix?
So the short version of myself or the long version?
Let's do a quick short one first, and then during the talk we'll dig deeper.
So I've been a software engineer for about 20 years now. Started off in research at the university in AI, research in AI and VR. Moved on to the MOD, did flight simulators across Europe and America. Moved to a telco, which was incredibly boring, so I won't say anything more about that. Came across and helped, there's a couple of Drawboard people here, helped Alistair on his mission with Drawboard for 5 years as technical co-founder. Learned a lot about product development, about software development and scaling, and B2C. And B2B eventually, which these guys are heavily into now. And then went to iflix as an engineering manager of the growth team. So there was no team when I started there, and I took existing engineers and brought them into the growth team and started to run experiments and working on things, SEO and quite a lot of experiments around bringing more users into the platform.
Gotcha. And for anyone who might not know and been living under a rock for the past couple of years, can you tell us what iflix does?
Oh, so iflix is like Netflix for Southeast Asia, but more slanted towards local content.
Cool.
Netflix is moving towards local content now.
Gotcha. All right. So we're going to talk about experimentation, and obviously the bedrock of that is data, and how that translates into designing funnels, you know, and deciding where to do experiments in the funnel, and then how to design an experiment, and some of the key mindset elements around around growth. But maybe tell us, what is the first step when it comes to, when somebody's thinking about growth, right? What would you say is the first step and the first component they got to think about?
So the first obstacle that I had when I went into iflix is they weren't really tracking the user and the traffic that was coming in. So I think one of the first things that I said to them was the user doesn't really have a voice in the room, which is something I learned from Drawboard. So one of the first things we did was put Google Analytics in and the Google Search Console in, which gave us visibility into the hygiene of the website, but also the users that were coming through. And it was free, of course, Google Analytics is, even though iflix is, I think at the time, at about 5 million users, so the data was sampled. But it was incredibly insightful to be able to see the kind of users. They already knew the kind of content that the users were watching. Regionally, they were using different analytics for that. But to be able to put the two together, so where the users are coming from, the demographic of the users, and then the content that they're watching, and then the quality of how we weren't really factoring in search results at that time, so the why of why we weren't factoring in. And it was free to put it in.
Yeah, so it's the data component being introduced to growth that allows it to be systematic, right? And that's why. And by the way, we talk about iflix, having a target of growing 10x. And when we were picking this title, we were thinking to ourselves, boy, we'll hope that people don't look at this and be like, yeah, well, 10x, if you have a couple of hundred users, that's not very difficult to achieve. Can you give us a little bit of perspective in terms of the growth? When we say 10x, what you just said it was 5 million. So can you tell us a little bit give us a bit of a perspective of what that growth looked like?
So 10 times that.
No, it's all right. Thank you so much for that. Going back to, I'm going to quickly change the subject. Going back to data, the first step, logical step, is putting Google Analytics in place. I know you are a big advocate for event-based data as well, right? And we spoke about this before. Tell us a little bit about that. What is the next step? So I've put in Google Analytics, but I think you're of the school that that's probably not enough, and we're going to look into some event-based data as well. Let's talk about that.
So iflix has already started on this journey. They were a couple of months in when I joined. The system that they're still using, they'd used in the past, they fire an event to Kinesis that goes into a data lake, and then they use Tableau to churn all of that data and analyze it in surface reports. But they put Amplitude in, so in the back end they put an intermediary in that fired the data to Amplitude. Again, Drawboard used Amplitude. But they were a couple of months into this. And with Amplitude, the problem with the data lake and Tableau, a couple of problems. One, it's operated in KL, so there's very little access to it from Australia, which is where the tech team sits. So it was very much a mission of bringing the data to the tech team. And it's very hard to generate, because there's so much data there, it's very hard to see trends quickly as they happen. Whereas when you put Amplitude in, you can actually see it real time.
Right.
So they were on a mission of putting that in. And quite a lot of the work that we've done is look at the events, and the other engineering leads as well, look at the events that are in place and then fill the gaps in. Try and build an end-to-end funnel of that user journey from surfacing a Google result all the way through to an engaged user.
And we're definitely going to talk about funnels. But before we talk about funnels, just show of hands, how many, you know what events, when we say events, you know what we mean? Can we quickly maybe define events and what events are in terms of analytics and user data?
Yeah, so say you've got a button, one of the ones that we're dealing with at the moment, you've got a button in a website and you want to encourage the users to download the app. The event is the thing that is fired off when the user does certain things, interacts with the platform, but clicks that button. You'll fire an event off saying the users click the button.
Yeah, so it's that interaction with a digital product that is versus, hey, they're on this page. It's they're on this page and they're interacting with it like this. And okay, cool. So let's say we put that in place. We have the web analytics with some like Google Analytics or whatever software we're using, and then we layer on top of that the user analytics, which is event-based, amplitude, mix panel, so on and so forth. Those tools. What's the next step? Like, you know, we're on the path of systemizing our growth. What's the next step that somebody has to keep in mind?
So one of the things that we did and I did is start to understand the user. iflix operates across Southeast Asia, and the behaviours of the users are very different in the different areas, and the content that they engage with is different in the different regions. And you need to understand all sorts of things about their local culture and what the data is telling you, and and linking that to other sources of data. So, for instance, quite a lot of the demographic 40 to 50 live in rural areas in Southeast Asia, and they don't have great internet connections, and they're still reliant on TV, traditional TV. So you then need to understand that if that's not your target demographic and it's not our target demographic, then we don't want to bring content in that is targeted towards those users.
Right.
So you need to understand what's going on inside the countries, and also trying to think of some other really interesting things. More people in Indonesia use voice-activated search than they do in Australia. It's like 6 out of 10 people that are internet-enabled use it, so it's a lot more prolific over there. The data is quite expensive. Things are quite expensive to them over there. The rich and poor divide's quite significant. iflix is quite a low-cost service, so if you can save them money on their data consumption, that's going to be a winner. So then it starts to bring that into the way that you're developing the product, because you want to start to develop things that are not data intensive for the user, like downloading being able to download and then share offline.
Yep, gotcha. And one of the things that you previously spoke about was you would look at spikes, right? And you then try to re-engineer that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when we put Google Analytics in, it actually had past data as well, and there was in quite a lot of the social media platforms. At the time, they were using Twitter and Facebook quite heavily, and they're still using Facebook really successfully. But we saw a spike in Instagram, a couple of big spikes in Instagram. So it then led us to go back to look at what those posts were and exactly what happened with those posts. And then we tried to simulate, like re-engineer that to make it happen. We worked out what had happened, specific kind of post for a movie at a specific time of day in a specific region, and then it tagged the actors and actresses. It sounds kind of simple when you think about it. A specific actress in a specific region was very popular, and then she re-grammed it. So then iflix were able to take that kind of information and start to write up contractual agreements that they have to do this as part of the contract, right, when they sign them onto the originals and the seasons.
I love that. You have to do it. I love it. And okay, so I get the data, start collecting the data, different formats of it. From the data, try to better understand the user. And then again, based on our previous conversations, it's time to start looking at the funnel, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that? When I've gone through those steps, now what do I need to look at after I've understand my users?
So you want to look at that's a tricky one. You need to be very broad at first to try and understand where the opportunities lie. So you want to look at the data that a lot of users, the pathways that a lot of users are going through, so you can lay your targets down there. And then you need to really focus in on an area that you choose to move the needle on, and then you can design your experiments around that. If you go into a room and you try to design your experiments around the entire platform, you'll never get out of the room, because everyone's got so many different opinions that these experiments will never happen. So you've got to go in and say something like, we want to improve the number of shares on the platform by 20% in the next 2 weeks. And the experiments that we're going to run are going to be very focused in on that.
Right. And can you tell us a little bit about how you would, before deciding where you want to improve, right? So you would put together a funnel, right? Can you tell us maybe a little bit about your experience about putting funnels together or drawing out a funnel and then deciding where to improve?
Yeah, so iflix it's interesting because the users originate from specific, from many different areas. So it all starts with a link, a share on Facebook, Instagram trailer that's got a swipe up action. The user shares from inside the product to another user on WhatsApp. A Google search result is surfaced and they click on that and they come in. So it has a starting point there, so that's going to be the start of the funnel. The end of the funnel is the target, the business, usually the big business target. So the business target for iflix is an engaged user that views content for X seconds. And then you need to work out from this point to that point the steps that they're going to go through. So if it was organic search, which we're very focused on, so the business does help guide that as well. They said, right, we're going to focus on organic search. Then it's impressions, clicks, sessions, and then it gets very tricky to relate the sessions to amplitude. So when you've got a different tracking system, it's very difficult to map the data over. But once you've worked that out, you can go from sessions to a user in amplitude, and then you can go from a user in amplitude to a viewing user, then you can go from a viewing user to an engaged user, so they're coming back multiple times. So you can actually see them going all the way through the funnel. And
right. And you brought an interesting point over there when you spoke about the metric, the North Star, the one main metric for iflix. What was that again? That's the number of engaged.
Yeah, it's changed a little bit over time. So it was just getting users into the platform, and now it's engaged users, and that even the engaged figure changes. So at the moment, it's how many seconds they've been watching a piece of content for, but in a few months it might change to something else.
Right.
Which could be, I don't know, if they've watched 10 episodes of something.
And why is it important to have a North Star with your growth? Why is it important to have that key metric?
So we have, at iflix, we have sessions where we've got, the majority of the company's in KL, but you've got, I represent the tech from the growth perspective, and then you've got the marketing, the content team, which is unique for a media company. You've got CFO, you've got somebody that's representing SEM, you've got product people, and we're all together on a call, and the call lasts for an hour and a half, 2 hours every week. When you've got the one metric that matters, and you've got an environment where people close people down very quickly, part of my French, but they basically say it's got nothing to do with getting 50, 10x MVU. So stop talking shit, let's move on. So it gives you that clarity and guidance to really make sure what you're doing and you're spending your time on is the most important thing to move in the needle.
Yeah. What do you think is the best way? I'm a small business, and I want to drive user growth. I've heard that the North Star is important, right? How do I go and define what my North Star is?
That's a good question.
Yeah, is there a system? It sounds like at iflix it's been a very organic and trial and error kind of process. Has that been the approach that, hey, let's pick this, let's work a little bit around that. We realize there are some loopholes in terms of this metric. Let's make it more sophisticated, and let's make it even further sophisticated. Has that been your experience at iflix?
I think you've got to pick something, and then you've got to iterate on it. So yeah, at iflix they picked a user that hits the site, and then they nailed that. They're like, right now we can track users that hit the site, but that's not. But we can see, let's say, engagement's dropping, but the user volume's going up. So now we need to change to factor in engagement. So now the North Star's changing to this. So they've got a very clear picture of it. They've hit it, and then the need of the business changes, or they work out that they need to change the North Star to accommodate some other business value, and then it moves. So if you're a small business, pick something, and then make sure you keep changing it. Gotcha. As the business evolves, the business is going to evolve. The founders of the business are going to start taking it in different directions, and that North Star needs to follow.
Right. Okay. Let's go back to the funnel, right? And with iflix, the starting point is the traffic on the website, or whatever keyword it is that is driving traffic. If it's SEO, let's say, and the last point of the funnel is the engagement, right? Resulting in an engaged user, right? When you're looking at the funnel, and there are all these, I don't know how many steps there are in between, right? Maybe you could shed a little bit of light on that. But also, how do you pick at what stage you're going to focus on improving what component of it? Do you start from the bottom? Do you start from top? Do you start from middle? Or there's a different methodology that you go about deciding what to focus on in terms of the funnel?
So if you've got numbers attached to each stage of your funnel, you can start off with a very simplistic funnel, like 3 steps, from A to B to C, work out where you're losing the most users, and then focus in. Basically, it's a bucket of water and fill the biggest hole in, and you'll keep more water in.
Gotcha. And how many steps are there now with iflix's? One of the, I'm guessing there are multiple different funnels that they have, but if you want to give us an example of one of the funnels that you guys have, what would that be?
Yeah, so I mentioned the organic search. So we've got the start with the keyword, the number of impressions, the clicks, the sessions, goes through to a user hitting the site. Then we actually want to get the user to download the app, because they're more engaged when they download the app. So then we've got a number of times that the download app prompts are rendered in the platform, the number of times that the users are clicking on it, then we link it into the number of hits on the App Store, then the number of installs, and then the number of first launches.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
So that's one long funnel.
Let's take a realistic example when you wanted to improve one of the conversion points, okay? And can you tell us a little bit about, you've picked a conversion point, and there is a team of, how big is the experimentation and growth team?
My team's only 5 people.
Gotcha, all right. So you've picked an area that you want to improve the conversion. How do you go about, because I'm guessing a lot of people are going to have a lot of different opinions about, hey, we should do this or we should do that. How do you go and say, we're going to focus on this particular experiment? Do you have a framework? Is there a process that you go through? How does that work? Maybe take us through a realistic example.
Yeah, so I'll take you through I mentioned that download call to action that we've got. That's in several places, but we picked download call to action as the theme, and then we looked at, so we always look at the data, and we look where the biggest opportunity is based on the number of times it's rendered and the fact that nobody's clicking on it, for instance. Then we take that and we go into a room. Actually, stepping back a phase, I'll map out the flows, the product flows, and how you can get to it. So, and then I'll take that into a room. We'll kick off with the team. This is where it's rendered. This is how it all fits together. And then everyone comes up with a bunch of ideas. Some cheesy music playing in the background as to how we can change, how we can improve that. And then at the end of that, we have a system where you can vote on the ideas. So you vote on the ideas, something will surface to the top, and then that's the thing that we'll pick. 1 or 2, we try and execute every week. Some things are very quick to execute on, some things aren't. Yeah, that's kind of the process.
Gotcha.
That we use.
And as part of this 5-team band, what are the roles? Like, what are we talking about? Are all software developers? Are there marketers? Are there designers? Are there?
So we've got a PO. So we're lucky that the head of product for Australia is in our team.
Mm-hmm.
So he's the PO that I work alongside, and then developers. It started off an iOS developer, a web developer, back end, and then I didn't know any of the stack, so didn't know anything. But it's changed to the iOS developer and the web developer are now cross-functional, so they've moved to iOS, web, and back end, and web and back end. And then the back end guys come to the front end as well, so he's web and front end, and then I just do what I need to do. So we're all pretty much cross-functional now.
Wow.
After about 6 months.
I love how there are no, like someone who comes with a marketing background. Is that's what it sounds like? Is that true?
On the team?
Like as in, yeah, like traditional marketing background.
Yeah, there's nobody in our team with a marketing background. We have a marketing department.
Yeah.
That we speak to. A lot of the team are very data oriented though. They'll
Even on the marketing side, you mean?
Not so much on the marketing side, but inside the team, the local growth team we've got here.
Right.
They're very data driven. They focus on the data.
Gotcha. Love that. Maybe we'll look at a couple of questions, if possible. Alex, what do we got? We got any?
Most popular at the moment is at the beginning. How many growth channels would you be running at once?
Yeah, how many growth channels at start?
So our team, I'm just trying to think how many we're running now. We're a very small team of 5 people, so 2, 3. The bigger organisation. So while we're running technical experiments on the product, they're running experiments in marketing, experiments in content, experiments with partners. So embedding the iflix player in different partner sites. So there can be maybe 10, 15
channels
across the business.
Right.
Just a couple locally.
And there are only 2 or 3 that you would be experimenting on, or you'd be experimenting on the whole thing, a whole 10, 12 channels?
So SEM is a constant experiment. SEO we're experimenting with. Product, inherent product virality we're experimenting with. The partnerships we're experimenting, say 5.
5 channels, okay. Let's take a question over there.
Ask a follow-up question to that. How quickly, or like, how do you know what the trigger is to say that that's failed and just drop it and move on? Like, what thought process do you go through to judge that?
Yes.
So you need to, that's the hardest thing to do, especially when you're the one that came up with the idea and it's not worked. And you've invested a week's worth of work into it. You need to be, what I've learned over the time is that right at the beginning you need to say how to pass or fail something, and then that's how you do it. So it's like you do a scientific experiment when you were at school, or when I was at school. You're aiming for a 10% growth rate in X, and if it hasn't, and you're going to say you're going to run that experiment for 2 weeks, and if it hasn't achieved that, you'll have the chart and you might check back on it in a couple of months, but now we're going to move on to something else. Sometimes you check back on that chart and it's gone through the roof, because sometimes things take longer than 2 weeks.
And that's a good question, because I wanted to focus on how do you run. So you've picked an experiment now. What happens then? You know, so you have, I think from previous conversation, you have a cadence of 2 weeks.
We run Kanban, but yeah, it's 2 week. The rest of the company's on a 2 week delivery cycle. So if we're running experiments in apps, there's a release train every 2 weeks. So
right.
that's when the release would go out.
Okay. So maybe give us a little bit of a better picture of, you know, we've picked the experiment now. What happens then?
So we pick the experiment and then we will work out what we need to do to achieve it. Sometimes there's back end work, sometimes there's front end work. We will work out, always need a control group and an experiment group. That's one of the most important things, so you can see the deviation. So A/B testing or split testing. So work out if you've got the events and the data that you need for the experiment. So the data, what technical changes need to happen, and then you just treat it like any other piece of software development. You work out what resource you've got on the team, you allocate the team with the tasks to do, and we collaborate around rolling it out.
And then get going. Okay.
And get going, and then wait.
Right, for the results to come out.
Yeah. So our board, our Jira board or our sprint board is it's basically to do, work in progress, done, released, and then there's another column at the end which is impact validated. So things stay in the released column until we've validated the impact of them, and we're not allowed to move them over until we've looked at the data. So things do stay there for a couple of weeks.
And how many experiments would you run at any given time?
Our team's like 2 or 3.
2 or 3 per week or per?
Per 2 weeks.
It
Depends on the nature and the scale of the experiment. We're trying to make them as short as possible. So there's always the question, how can we do that quicker?
Right.
And there's a lot of technical people that push back against the quick implementation, which is one of the roles that I find myself in quite a lot.
What is that role again, sorry?
Saying, we could do it like that, but let's just do it like this. And then smoothing over all of the gaps. You know, we can do it the proper way, but what's the point if nobody's going to use it?
Gotcha.
So, but you've got to build trust up that you will delete the code, because otherwise you'll accumulate a lot of debt and dead code in the product. So you need to stand by your word and make sure you delete the experiment if it's a failure.
Right. And do you get pressured from the organization if you run a lot of, like, how does the organization look at these and Matthew, you've ran 5 tests this month and you've spent, this number of hours of our team and all of them have failed. Have you had that conversation before, or has that been an issue before?
It's never been an issue. So that's one of the strengths of iflix. They recognise that to achieve the growth that they're gonna lose 9 times out of 10. That's just the way it is. We were lucky that we got some big wins in the beginning, mainly because they hadn't looked at this area in great detail before. So we got some big wins on YouTube and Instagram and social media platforms.
And that helped?
That helped build the trust to mess everything else up. And then,
gotcha. Okay.
like sometimes you'll roll something out and the SEO will just go through the floor.
And then reverse. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions before we kind of move on? Yeah, go for it.
So, video privacy is so rampant in Southeast Asia, right? So how does iflix compete with video privacy and with Netflix or Astro or whoever that's offering certain videos streaming?
So that's interesting. They've changed their revenue model actually. So they're more of an ads-based business now, as opposed to a subscription-based business. For that exact reason, and it's still hard to get the message out that the service is free. If you look at a lot of the Chinese services as well, they use certain techniques to keep users coming in. So you could say, right, if you use the service continuously for a week, we're going to give you 3 weeks worth of premium content for free, but there'll still be ads. And that means that people have to go back and keep watching every day to keep that content. A lot of Chinese services do that.
Okay. We got a technical question that has got a lot of votes. How do you map the data between Amplitude and other data platforms?
That's who asked that? That's the most difficult thing to do. Google Analytics and Amplitude is incredibly difficult to do. Google Analytics 360 we don't have, so you've always got a sample in Google Analytics. Doesn't matter how many filters that you put in, you've kind of got to draw a line. That's a battle we're trying to fight at the moment. Converting sessions to hits in Amplitude, there's a about a 10% disparity in the data, even though we've cleaned it all up and removed duplication. Amplitude we use Apps Flyer to measure the installs in the app stores. That does come with an integration that you can bring back into Amplitude, so it will share that. The links are the commonality between everything, so UTM parameters on all of the links. And we're at the stage now where my team actually wrote a link shortening service that can search the catalogue of titles, so you can pick the title that the marketing team, that you can say you're doing a Facebook post, and then it just automatically adds all the UTM parameters, because the marketing team are never going to do it consistently. And then that goes into the event pipeline in Amplitude, and it splits it apart, so we can actually segment users on UTM source, campaign, and content fields, and then you can add other bits and pieces on if you want. So we use UTM parameters. We're not paying for the integration between Apps Flyer and Amplitude at the moment, so we're using in the Amplitude event, we're decorating the tag with the link for Apps Flyer, so you can then filter on the link at one end and you can filter on the link at the other end, and the data fits together. In terms of inherent product sharing, UTM parameters again, per title, and then you can append the user ID to it, so you can actually see when somebody, you can't yet because we haven't implemented it, but you will be able to see when somebody shares a link and when somebody clicks a link and comes back in, who the sharer was and who came back in, which then feeds into things like rewarding a user for sharing 10 times or something. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I have one question as well. What are, in your journey, and not necessarily just in iflix, what are some of the mistakes that you've made in terms of growth that has really, stayed with you in this journey, and you kind of always refer back to, or was big lessons that you've learned? Can you think of anything?
That's a hard question.
A couple more questions over here if you want. We can think about that for a while.
So I think it comes down to the people. Probably the biggest mistake that I've made throughout my career, not necessarily just to do with growth, is you've got to build trust in the team and get the team to build trust in you, and then let them follow the experiments through, analyse the data, and put everything together. Almost make yourself replaceable in that team, so you can step out and they still keep on doing that. So educating people about the growth. So the biggest mistake that I've made there is stepping in and saying, no, don't do it like that, and being hyper controlling around the experiments, instead of letting some people take ownership of the experiments and run with it. It's probably the biggest.
It's interesting. Yeah. So okay, we got another technical question, and that's about the framework or method. What framework or method do your software development teams use, like Scrum, and what are typical roles within a team? We kind of covered this, but is there anything else you want to?
iflix is really interesting. It's kind of an agile. Well, we run Kanban, but kind of inside a waterfall framework, because there's a lot of investors and things need to be delivered, so you need a roadmap. So we've got quarterly roadmaps. The quarterly roadmap then feeds into fortnightly sprints. The roadmap can be changed around outside of the kind of 30 days that you're attacking, and then I actually put other things in as well. So and then we pick them up and we move them through in Kanban. I update the reports every 2 weeks, but I pretty much take that 90 days worth of tasks in the roadmap, stack them up, and we pick one up and run it through. So right. The main thing is always we pull things from the right. So when a team member's finished with something and it goes for PR, always pull something from the right. So if something needs testing, they'll then pick that up and test it instead of bringing another development task on, because the PR is inevitably going to come back, and they're not doing some of the development work. so we're not stacking it up, and the whip limits. So there's a whip limit, there's 5 team members, there's a whip limit of 5, so nobody can pick up any more than one thing. If they finish what they're doing and there's nothing to pull from the right, they still don't pick up anything else. They'll go and review other people's PRs, or they'll look at the data. So incredible focus to move things through. And then stand-ups, I call them I just call them a session. I don't like the word stand-up. A lot of my team are remote. We do it on Google Hangout, and we're talking about, very technically, about the blockers that we've got, about the implementations. We'll bring code up on the screen, we'll share it, we'll look at it, we'll go through it, we'll brainstorm, and we use that time not as a status update, as a teaching session on what we've been doing and the problems that we found. And organically out of that, one of the engineers might say, I'll help you this morning with that. So you get a lot. That's kind of how they've become cross-functional as well.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
If that answers the question. But the company itself has a release train every 2 weeks for the apps. So things get moved into a release cut. They get QA'd. The QA team, this is the waterfall section. The QA team's over in KL, so they'll go through everything that's in that release cut. There's a hard deadline, and then they'll test it, and then it comes back. It's the QA development churn cycle, and then the release goes out, and then it goes into released, and then, as I mentioned before, impact validated, so it just sticks in release until we validated that it's had impact.
Yep.
And then if we run secondary experiments, they come back in.
Cool. Let's take another question from audience. Is there, yeah, go for it.
So, like, in terms, this is a follow-up question to what you said, like, letting people know that it's free service. So, in terms of that, have you tried, I mean, what sort of effort that, in terms of like social media, like letting people know and this is for free, and like what sort of like effort and result?
So yeah, apparently 60% of the users still don't know that it's for free, which is remarkable. Football Malaysia, so iflix air all of the live Football Malaysia games. So billboards at all of the Football Malaysia games that say iflix is free. Hashtag free on every single video, that trailer that's uploaded to YouTube. If you do a search for an iflix title, or just do watch iflix or something, you'll see that we've put free for all of the content in the middle. So it's very clear, but still used, and all the social posts, the videos themselves have got branded imprints that say iflix free. You couldn't really communicate it anymore, but people still don't get it. 60%.
That happens in a lot of situations, I guess. What are, Matt, what would you say are some of the key, if somebody's approaching this mindset of experimentation, right, and they want to do more experiments with regards to the growth of their company, what are the key mindsets that you think they need to put in place? We've touched on some of them. I think it would be good to bring all of them together. And say you got to make sure that these are the components that are embedded in the culture, the team is taking into consideration. What would you say some of the top ones are?
So you're going to fail 9 times out of 10. That's for sure. So there needs to be tolerance to failure. Because you're going to fail 9 times out of 10, there needs to be a culture and a technical culture that embraces experiments. You don't have to add 50,000 unit tests around every single piece of code that you write, because that's going to slow you down, and eventually if the experiment fails, it's going to be deleted. So you're just wasting time. So you need to work with the engineering team to, it depends how big the organization is, but accrue technical debt and build that trust to remove it. If not, architect the experiments into the product. So iflix itself has the ability to turn things on and off. I think they're in about 15 different regions. They can turn it on and off by country. They can turn a feature on and off by country. They can turn it on and off to a percentage of the users in that country as well in a feature dashboard. So we're quite lucky to be able to do that. So a culture where things go out, you can just turn it off and you can turn it on. Or you can say, as we did yesterday with one of the experiments that we're running. It's really successful in the Philippines. Now let's roll it out to 50% of users in Indonesia, and you can just do that in 3 clicks of a button. Right. I think that's incredibly, to have that power is incredibly beneficial.
Has there been situations that somebody's very invested in a personally, emotionally, technically invested in an experiment, and you run it and it's a flop, and what happens afterwards, or there's a bit of a debate afterwards? Has that happened? Has that been an issue that you don't want to step away from the experiment even though it didn't work out?
It's been an issue with me. So we saw that Instagram blip, and we actually re-emulated it, and we got it into the contracts, and then I probably took it too far, and I started putting, we spent a couple of weeks putting Instagram sharing into the mobile apps, so we thought we'll get the users to do it for us, and then that didn't work, and then it's like, well, maybe we'll move it here, and then that didn't work. So yeah, I use myself as an example.
Yep.
That's about 5 months ago, and then quickly, now we can close things down pretty quickly, and we're very candid among the team. It's like, that's because I said to them after that episode, if that happens again, just tell me, and we'll shut it down, because usually the person whose idea it is the most invested in it. It can help for somebody whose idea it wasn't to be the person who implements it, or to be the person that's in control of
Right, that's really interesting. Okay. And have you seen success in that? So you would come up with an idea and a team member would do the implementation. Would you get hyper micromanagement in there and be like, no, this is not what I thought, I was thinking of this way? Or have you seen success in that, or have you seen challenges in that?
At the moment in our team, it's mostly who's got the skills to push it over the line. A lot of the team get involved together in the same thing, but when it comes to making the call, looking at the data and saying, this is the wrong thing, everyone has a voice, and we don't continue things that aren't working. And the business has started stepping in as well. So we've got this fortnightly meeting that we have with the marketing team, and in that forum, they say, right, this hasn't moved the needle on this North Star, so we're closing you down. So you don't have any option there.
Okay, gotcha.
So, reallocate your resources.
Let's take, thank you very much for that. Let's take a question from here and then a question from the audience. So the next one is, which experiments has resulted in biggest impact on North Star, and which growth tactics had led to great LTV CPV ratio? Maybe let's talk about the first question first.
Sorry, that was a typo. It's meant to be greatest lifetime value over cost per acquisition ratio.
Right, okay. That's all good. But let's go through the first one. What has been some of the experiments that you ran that has been very impactful?
So this is an interesting one. Specific trailers. So all of our content, we can now generate a trailer from and push it up to YouTube. So that's the most impactful. But it took a long time. It was a wedge of growth. It wasn't just a sharp growth curve. So the more videos, the more links that you have, it just grows and grows over time. So that's been one of the most impactful, and it was also an experiment that we very nearly pulled the plug on, because there was a lot of technical complexity to be able to do that.
Sorry, so creating a trailer about a show
and then pushing it to YouTube with a certain with a template, basically.
Right, and that created extra links.
Yeah.
Which help with.
So the users click on the link and they come back and they can watch the movie.
Right. Okay.
So
okay.
Put a trailer of Jurassic Shark up. Somebody clicks on the link and they're watching Jurassic Shark.
I see. Right.
YouTube. So basically, hijacking YouTube traffic.
Ah, that's cool. Yeah. What else?
I mean, a lot. We've had a tremendous amount of growth through SEO. So really cleaning up the SEO hygiene of the page from, I think it was rated at 64%, and it rates over 90% now. Changing the page titles, changing the format of the content, metadata, keywords, based on all of the research that we've done, has had a big impact on growth as well.
Okay.
Hundreds of thousands of users.
Right. Wow. The second part of the question is which growth tactics? When we say tactics, tactics, are you talking about the same?
So, yeah,
What?
experimental tactics. Basically, the best bang for buck in terms of these users are valuable, and I've paid almost nothing to acquire them. Anything come to mind in terms of best bang for buck experiments?
I can talk about one that the company's ran outside of the team, and it is, so they used to acquire a lot of Western content, and then they went to local content, focusing on movies, and then they went to regional TV shows, and then they started picking TV shows just after they'd been aired on the TV, and then marketing that it was available on iflix after that, through radio, through online, through search, and that led to 4x worth of user growth in 3 weeks.
Wow.
It's insane.
Right. Go for it.
Has it worked out for you for when you run an SEO based campaign, and how you can like determine your SEM campaign then? Like if there is success in your SEO, do you then push it towards paid marketing then?
So SEM is something that we're still learning as a company. What we do have is we know the demographic of the user, we know the titles that are most popular with that user, and we can track the users, and we can do retargeting campaigns with the users. And because we know the titles, we know the actors and actresses, we know the keywords, so we can then use all of those keywords to see the ads to run the SEM campaigns, as long as the keywords aren't too expensive, and they're not usually in Southeast Asia.
Okay. And I'm going to ask a completely different question. So let's say somebody wants to get into the growth space and really get more familiar with the principles and how things are organized and the processes and all that. Do you have any recommendations for material for them to go through? Books, blogs to read, courses to take? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, so Lean Analytics, Rowan got me onto that one. Inspired, Measure What Matters. I'll share these in the Slack channel. I spend a lot of time reading books around human behavior as well. So what motivates people, how people get engaged with things. Struggling to think of the actual book titles, but I'll share them after this.
That'd be awesome.
And the reason I mentioned the behavior thing is when you're dealing with messaging, like so we've run an experiment on that download call to action button, changing the text, and we got 20% increase in people clicking it just because we changed. What was it? Get more free movies in the app to get your free movies in the app. So just that one bit of text, personalizing it, has led to that. So, and then all the usual, like Moz has got a lot of good SEO advice.
Amazing. All right. Now, I mean, this was amazing, and thank you very much for joining. Now, if anyone wants to get in touch with you or have more questions, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
I joined the Growth Colony Slack.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, join that.
Fantastic. So, I mean, if you're wondering, that's we got it up. Yeah, that's growthcolony.org/Slack. So definitely join the community, and it would be awesome if we could put the name of the books over there, and we, all of this is recorded. So if you want to go back to it, we're gonna once the editing of the video is done, we'll put it up there, and definitely check it out. But on that note, thank you very much for this evening. Thank you. Cheers. Guys, we're gonna hang around. So if you if you got more questions, or you want to just network or have a couple more chips or beer, please feel free to stick around. And other than that, actually, we got a next event that is coming up that I got to promote as well. So the next event is a founders panel about the mistakes that I've made growing my business. So the panel is, the speakers are from companies that have either raised a couple of $1 million, or they're serial entrepreneurs, or they have very well-established businesses here in Australia. So it's not, it's not small founders. These are people who have great traction, and I think there's plenty to take away. So if that sounds interesting, definitely make sure to check out our next event. That is going to be right here, and that is on Thursday, 25th of July. On that note, thanks so much. Thank you very much. That was really good. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, thanks.